Trapped in a suffocating casino, Clara faced ruin, her sister's life hanging by a thread, and her cruel boss ready to claim her. Then a ruthless mafia boss with emerald eyes saw her desperate mistake and won everything. He became her new debt collector, her silent watcher, pulling her into a gilded cage. But when her past hunted her down, he didn't just save her. He unleashed an unhinged fury, promising absolute vengeance. Now she's branded, claimed. Can she survive being the obsession of a mafia boss who owns her fate? The air in the Viper's den was a suffocating blend of stale cigar smoke, expensive whiskey, and the insidious tang of desperation. It clung to Clara Thorne's hair, permeated her crisp black uniform, and settled deep in her lungs, a constant physical reminder of the gilded cage she inhabited. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as she expertly shuffled a fresh deck of cards, the slick, cool plastic a familiar weight. Tonight, however, the tremor was more pronounced, a brittle echo of the fear gnawing at her insides. The green felt of the poker table felt impossibly soft beneath her fingertips, a stark contrast to the rough edges of her reality. Around her, the clinking of chips, the hushed murmurs of high rollers, and the occasional sharp laugh created a symphony of illicit wealth. This was the world of the privileged and the predatory, where fortunes were won and lost with a casual flick of a wrist, and human lives often felt like just another chip in the pot. Clara hated it. Every velvet-covered surface, every gleaming chandelier, every heavy oak door that promised exclusivity felt like a chain tightening around her. Her gaze, meticulously trained to remain neutral, scanned the faces across the table. Men with eyes too sharp, smiles too wide, and wallets too thick. They came here to hunt, and sometimes to be hunted. But Clara? She was merely the bait, the silent, elegant mechanism that kept the game flowing. All of her own life bled out with every passing hour. The image of her sister, Lily, flashed behind her eyes, pale, fragile, hooked up to a tangle of tubes and wires in a sterile hospital room. The antiseptic smell, so different from the den's opulent stench, was almost a comfort now, a symbol of hope she desperately clung to. Hope, expensive hope. The medical bills piled higher than the chips on any table here, an insurmountable mountain that had driven Clara to make a deal with the devil himself. Silas Thorne. Silas. The name was a venomous whisper in her mind. He was the owner of the Viper's Den, a man whose tailored suits never quite disguised the reptilian coldness in his gaze. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, like a predator confident in its dominion. He saw Clara not as an employee, but as a purchased commodity, her debt a leash he tugged whenever he pleased. And he pleased often. Earlier that evening, during her short break in the dimly lit staff room, Silas had appeared, leaning against the doorframe, his shadow long and menacing. Still working those pretty fingers to the bone, Clara? His voice was smooth as aged scotch, but laced with an undeniable threat. Remember our arrangement. Every cent, every week. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to your little bird, would we? He hadn't touched her, hadn't even raised his voice. But the implication, the insidious promise of harm to Lily, had frozen the blood in Clara's veins. He was a master of silent intimidation, his power absolute within these walls. The metallic taste of fear had coated her tongue. The debt was crushing, a colossal sum she could never hope to earn dealing cards. Not legitimately, anyway. The tips were decent, sometimes even generous from drunken high rollers, but they were a drop in an ocean of medical expenses and Silas's relentless interest. She tried. Oh God, she tried. During slow hours, she'd sometimes subtly flirt with a client she deemed harmless, hoping for an extra 100 here, another 200 there. But Silas had eyes everywhere, his silent enforcers lurking in the shadows, their presence a constant reminder that any deviation from her assigned role would be met with swift, brutal consequences. Last week, she'd overheard 2 junior dealers whispering about a woman who tried to embezzle from the house, just a few thousand. She disappeared. No one spoke her name again. The memory was chilling, a stark warning. Clara couldn't disappear. Lily needed her. So she dealt, night after agonizing night, her smile fixed, her eyes blank. Each chip pushed, each card turned, felt like another shackle around her wrists. She was trapped, suffocated by the very opulence that surrounded her. The faint scent of expensive cologne from a passing waiter, a scent too sharp, too masculine, too confident, made her stomach clench. It was the scent of power, a power she was utterly devoid of. A bell chimed faintly from the VIP section, signaling a new arrival. Clara didn't look up, didn't dare. Her world was the green felt, the plastic cards, and the silent count of her dwindling hope. She imagined the cold, sterile walls of Lily's hospital room, the rhythmic beep of the machines keeping her sister alive. That was her only anchor, her sole reason to endure this abyss. But even anchors could drag you down. She stacked the chips, her thoughts spiraling into a familiar pattern of despair. How much longer could she last? How much more could she sacrifice before there was nothing left of her to give? A new player took a seat at her table, directly opposite her. She felt him before she saw him, a sudden, undeniable shift in the room's energy, a tangible weight of presence that made the hushed murmurs around them fall even lower. Her internal alarm bell screamed. This was not a typical player. This was something different, dangerous. She lifted her gaze slowly, professionally, forcing her eyes to meet his. And in that instant, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. His eyes were green. Not a warm, inviting green, but the deep, polished green of ancient emeralds, reflecting the subdued light of the den with an unnerving intensity. They held hers with a possessive grip that stole her breath. This man, he wasn't just observing. He was dissecting. And she had a horrifying premonition that he had just seen right through the practiced mask of indifference she wore, straight into the dark, desperate abyss of her soul. The game was about to change. The man sat directly opposite Clara, a formidable silhouette against the backdrop of the club's opulent gloom. His presence was not merely seen but felt, an oppressive weight that seemed to suck the oxygen from the air around him. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy. His power radiated from an almost unnerving stillness, a deep reservoir of controlled energy. His suit, a dark, impeccably tailored expanse of charcoal wool, seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, making him a focal point of shadowed intensity. A faint, almost imperceptible scent, something clean, sharp, and undeniably expensive, drifted across the felt table, a stark contrast to the cloying aroma of the club. Clara kept her gaze lowered, her eyes flitting from card to chip, her movements precise, practiced. But she felt his gaze, a tangible pressure, like a spotlight searing into her. Those green eyes, the color of ancient emeralds, were fixed on her, not with predatory lust like many of the patrons, but with a dissecting intensity that made her skin prickle. It was as if he wasn't looking at her, but through her, stripping away her practiced neutrality, laying bare the raw nerves humming beneath her uniform. Her heart, a frightened bird, fluttered erratically against her ribs. "Ante up," she announced, her voice a smooth, professional murmur, betraying none of the internal turmoil. The chips clinked, a low, hypnotic rhythm of wealth changing hands. This was a high-stakes table, even for the Vipers Denver. The stacks of chips before each player were monumental, shimmering mountains of red, black, and purple. Millions, quite possibly. And in the center of it all, this man, Roman Volkov, sat like a king on his throne, his face unreadable. The game progressed, each hand a miniature drama of bluff and strategy. Clara dealt with flawless efficiency, her fingers a blur of motion. She watched expressions, calculated odds, listened for tells, a skill born of desperation and survival. But tonight, her focus was fractured. Silas Thorne's veiled threats still echoed in her ears, his lingering shadow from part one a constant reminder of her precarious position. And then there was Roman. His silent scrutiny was a new kind of pressure, colder and more unnerving than Silas's open menace. It was the seventh hand. The pot was enormous, a glittering expanse of chips drawing every eye. Roman was in, holding firm, his betting methodical, relentless. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Clara's breath hitched slightly as she slid the river card across the felt. A momentary slip. A tiny, almost imperceptible hesitation. Her thumb, momentarily sticky with nerves, dragged just a fraction too long, revealing the barest edge of the card, a fleeting glimpse of its corner before she quickly righted it. It was nothing. A blink and you miss it error. Most players wouldn't have noticed. But Roman Volkov wasn't most players. His emerald eyes, which hadn't left her face for a second, narrowed. A flicker. Was it amusement? Or calculation? Danced in her depths. He didn't speak. He didn't react outwardly. He simply held her gaze for another beat, then, with a slow, deliberate movement, pushed a mountain of chips forward. All in. A gasp rippled around the table. The other players, their faces pale with shock or excitement, folded one by one. This was Roman's game now. Clara's stomach dropped. Had he seen? Could such a tiny, insignificant mistake cost her more than just this hand? The thought of Silas, surely watching from his elevated perch, made a cold dread bloom in her chest. If Silas found out she'd made an error, especially one that affected Roman Volkov, the consequences would be dire. Lily's face, pale and vulnerable, flashed in her mind. Roman laid down his cards. A straight flush, the highest possible hand. He had won. Not just the hand, but the entire pot, a sum that could likely buy a small country. He collected his chips with a graceful, unhurried ease that bespoke immense practice and even greater power. There was no boastfulness, no triumphant smirk, just a quiet, absolute certainty. As the other players dispersed, mumbling their respects or curses, Clara began to clear the table, her hands still trembling slightly. The heat of Roman's gaze lingered, a phantom touch on her skin. He remained seated, watching her. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken meanings. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a powerful declaration of his dominance. He reached into the inner pocket of his impeccably tailored jacket, a movement so fluid it was almost imperceptible. He didn't pull out a wallet, but a plain white envelope, crisp and thick. He placed it squarely in the middle of the table, directly in front of Clara. "For you," he said, his voice a low rumble, surprisingly smooth, yet carrying an undertone of dangerous authority. It was the first time he'd spoken directly to her, and the sound sent an unexpected shiver down her spine, not entirely of fear, but of something deeper, a subtle thrum of apprehension mixed with a strange, undeniable fascination. Clara hesitated, then picked up the envelope. It felt substantial, heavy. Inside, nestled amongst a stack of crisp $100 bills, was a small, stark white card. The card itself was thick, luxurious, clearly custom-made. On it, in elegant, precise script, were only a few words. "Careful, little bird. This cage is watched. RV." Her breath hitched. "Little bird." The words echoed in her mind, a mocking endearment, a predatory warning. He knew. He had seen her desperation, her vulnerability, the invisible bars of her cage. He hadn't just won the hand, he had seen her soul, lay bare her predicament. And he was watching. The cryptic message was a brand, a mark. It was both a threat and a strange, dark promise. Clara looked up, her eyes meeting his emerald gaze once more. There was no warmth, no sympathy, only a potent, calculating intelligence. His lips curved slightly, a ghost of a smile that never quite reached his eyes. It was a smile that promised both danger and an inescapable, bewildering fate. The game was far from over. And she, the dealer, had just become a piece on his board. The ominous silence that followed Roman Volkov's departure was more terrifying than any shouted threat. Clara clutched the crisp white card, the words, "Careful, little bird." This cage is watched burning into her mind like a brand. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated dread. She knew with chilling certainty that Silas Thorne had witnessed the exchange. Every subtle nuance, every loaded glance, Every unspoken word between her and Roman would have been meticulously analyzed by the shark. And Silas did not tolerate trespassers on his territory, especially when that territory was her. She didn't have to wait long for the inevitable retribution. After her shift, as the last of the high rollers staggered out and the cleaning crew began their somber work, Silas appeared. He materialized from the shadows near her table, his tailored suit suddenly seeming to ripple with menace. The faint scent of his expensive cologne, usually a sign of his presence, now felt like the harbinger of a storm. "A generous tip tonight, Clara," Silas purred, his voice low and saccharine, a dangerous lull before the inevitable blow. He took a step closer, then another, until his imposing frame loomed over her. The fluorescent lights of the deserted club cast harsh shadows, making his eyes gleam with reptilian coldness, especially from Mr. Volkov. "What did you do to earn such special attention?" Clara's spine stiffened. "Nothing, Mr. Thorne. I dealt the game as instructed." She tried to keep her voice even, but a tremor betrayed her. The fear was a cold, clammy hand gripping her throat. Silas chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Nothing. A rare feat for you, little girl. Volkov isn't known for his charity. Perhaps you were too attentive. Or perhaps you made a mistake that benefited him. A very costly mistake for my house." His hand shot out, not touching her, but slamming flat on the table, inches from her trembling fingers. The sound was a deafening crack in the quiet club. The force vibrated through the felt, up her arms, rattling her very bones. "I assure you, I made no mistakes," Clara insisted, though the lie felt flimsy even to her. The fleeting glimpse of the card, the barely there drag of her thumb, Roman had seen it, and Silas suspected it. "Don't lie to me," Silas hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that still cut through the quiet. His face, usually so composed, contorted into a mask of pure rage. "You belong to me, Clara. Every breath you take, every card you deal, every beat of your pathetic little heart is mine until your debt is paid. And that debt? It just got a whole lot bigger." He leaned closer, his stale breath fanning her face. "I've heard rumors of certain outside attempts to secure funds. I don't appreciate competition for my assets. Perhaps a week of double shifts, unpaid, would remind you of your place. Or perhaps a little visit to your sister, to remind her who truly holds her leash." The veiled threat against Lily was a spear through her heart. Clara gasped, her face paling. "No, don't you dare touch her." Silas merely smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Then don't tempt me. Now clean this table. And remember, little bird, fly too close to the sun, and your wings will burn." He turned abruptly, his figure disappearing back into the labyrinthine shadows of his domain, leaving Clara shivering, the air suddenly heavy with the stench of her own rising panic. The next morning, Clara dragged herself to the hospital, her body aching, her mind a whirlwind of fear and despair. Lily's pale face on the pillow, her weak smile, only fueled Clara's desperation. She was trapped, utterly, irrevocably trapped. Then a sleek black town car, impossibly quiet, pulled up beside her as she walked the few blocks back to her tiny, depressing apartment. The tinted windows slid down, revealing not Roman, but a man in a sharp suit, his face impassive. "Miss Thorne," he asked, his voice smooth and neutral. "Mr. Volkov wishes to speak with you. He insists it cannot wait." Clara hesitated, fear warring with a strange, desperate curiosity. "I don't know any Mr. Volkov." The man merely offered a polite, unyielding smile. "He knows you. And he knows about your sister, Lily. He believes he can help." The mention of Lily snapped her resolve. She climbed into the car, the plush leather seats feeling incongruous with her disheveled state. The ride was silent, swift, and unsettlingly private. They arrived at a towering penthouse, a glass monolith piercing the city's skyline. It was opulent, immaculate, and utterly devoid of the warmth that might make it a home. Roman was waiting in a sprawling living area, framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. He stood by a minimalist bar, a crystal glass in hand, his dark suit accentuating his formidable physique. The emerald green of his eyes, usually so intense, held a glint of something almost expectant. "Clara," he greeted, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk." He didn't waste time. He laid out the terms, not of a rescue, but a hostile takeover. "Silas Thorne no longer owns your debt," he stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Nor his club." "I do." He pushed a folder across the polished glass table. Inside, a series of documents, legal and binding, detailed the immediate acquisition of the Viper's Den, including all its assets and liabilities. Her debt was explicitly listed, with his name now beside it. Clara stared, utterly overwhelmed. You bought him out? All of it. The sheer scale of his power, the swiftness and ruthlessness of his actions, stole her breath. It was efficient, Roman conceded, and necessary. He was a nuisance, and he was harming what I deemed valuable. His gaze locked onto hers, an unmistakable possessiveness flickering in his green eyes. "Which brings me to you." He offered her a choice, but it was no choice at all. "You will live here," he said, gesturing to the sprawling penthouse. "Your sister's medical care will be handled by the best specialist, without cost. You will be safe, protected. You will have everything you need. In return, you will remain here, under my protection. You will follow my rules. You are no longer indebted to Silas. You are now indebted to me." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. From one cage to another, albeit a gilded one. The air conditioning was perfectly calibrated, the view breathtaking, the quiet oppressive. "This is another trap," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Roman's lips curved into that rare, dangerous half-smile. "Perhaps. But it's a trap with far softer walls, little bird. And this time it's watched by someone who won't let you fall." He stepped closer, the scent of him clean, sharp, powerful, enveloping her. "Refuse, and Silas will undoubtedly find a new way to reclaim his property. A much less pleasant way. He will not take kindly to being superseded." His gaze hardened. "And Lily will no longer have the care she needs." The mention of Lily was the final, devastating blow. Clara swallowed, the taste of ashes in her mouth. She was terrified, but a desperate, reluctant relief also flickered. Safety for Lily. Protection from Silas. She looked around the opulent prison, then back at Roman's unyielding face. He had saved her, but he had also claimed her. And she had no choice but to accept her new golden cage. "Ah, I accept," she whispered, the words feeling foreign and heavy on her tongue. Roman merely nodded, a flicker of something triumphant in his emerald eyes. "Good," he said, the single word a declaration of undeniable ownership. "Welcome home, Clara. Your new life begins now." The penthouse was a study in minimalist luxury. Polished chrome gleamed under recessed lighting, contrasting with the soft, muted tones of expensive fabrics and dark, rich wood. The air, cooled to a precise, unvarying temperature, carried no scent of stale smoke or desperation, only the faint, clean aroma of expensive ozone and something indefinably Roman. It was a world away from the gritty reality of the Viper's Den, a stark, breathtaking monument to power and control. Yet Clara felt the invisible bars of her new cage more acutely with each passing hour. Her bedroom, a vast expanse of muted grays and whites, offered panoramic views of the city that now felt like a distant, unreachable dream. The king-size bed, impossibly soft, swallowed her, a decadent trap. She had a walk-in closet filled with exquisite clothes, none of which truly felt like hers. A personal chef prepared gourmet meals that she often picked at, her appetite stifled by the weight of her predicament. She had privacy, yes, but it was the privacy of a prized exhibit, not a free woman. Every polished surface, every silent, efficient automation whispered of Roman's omnipresence. Surveillance was subtle but constant. She caught glimpses of tiny, almost invisible cameras nestled in corners, heard the soft, almost imperceptible hum of advanced security systems. The few staff members, a housekeeper, a personal assistant who managed her schedule, or rather lack thereof, moved with a practiced quietness, their faces polite but distant. They were Roman's people, extensions of his will. The knowledge that she was always being watched, always observed, made her skin crawl. Even her phone, a sleek new model provided by Roman, had no outgoing signal, only inbound calls from a pre-approved list, primarily the hospital. But then there was Lily. The news from the hospital was, for the first time in months, genuinely positive. Lily had been moved to a private suite, attended by a team of specialists, her condition showing marked improvement. Clara spoke to the head nurse daily, her heart swelling with a gratitude so profound it was almost painful. This was the golden thread weaving through her confinement, the irresistible leverage Roman wielded. The fear for Lily's life had been a crushing weight. Now a cautious optimism dared to bloom in her chest, a hesitant ray of sunlight in her gilded cage. Roman's appearances were sporadic, unpredictable, and always impactful. He would materialize in the living area as she nursed a cup of herbal tea, or find her in the vast, almost sterile kitchen as she contemplated her untouched breakfast. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, his tailored suits always impeccable, his dark hair always slicked back, revealing the sharp planes of his aristocratic face. His emerald eyes were a constant, a focal point of intense scrutiny. They would track her every movement, linger on her face, probe her reactions. It was unnerving, violating in its intensity. Clara found herself subconsciously straightening her posture, trying to project an air of composure she didn't feel. "Did you rest well, Clara?" he would ask, his voice a low rumble, the words simple, yet carrying an undercurrent of something more. "Test? A veiled demand? As well as can be expected, Mr. Volkov," she'd retort, a quiet defiance simmering beneath her polite facade. She refused to crumble, refused to let him see the raw vulnerability that still throbbed within her. Small acts of rebellion became her currency, leaving a book open on a pristine coffee table, daring to wear her old, comfortable sweatpants instead the silk robes provided, meeting his gaze directly, unflinchingly. One afternoon, she found him in his home office, a vast space of dark wood and leather, dominated by a wall of screens displaying complex financial data and, disturbingly, live feeds from around the city, including, she realized with a jolt, a discreet camera pointed at her old apartment building. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. He truly was always watching. He looked up from his desk, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. "Your sister's latest scans are promising," he stated, his voice softer than usual. He wasn't asking, he was informing, a subtle act of reassurance. He knew what mattered to her. Clara's guard momentarily dropped. "Really? That's wonderful news." A genuine smile, rare and fragile, touched her lips. Roman watched it, his intense gaze lingering, and for a fleeting second, the hard edges around his emerald eyes seemed to soften, almost imperceptibly. He nodded once. "I ensure the best. You need not worry." The words were delivered with such quiet certainty, such absolute conviction, that a warmth, unfamiliar and unsettling, bloomed in Clara's chest. It was the flicker of his protective nature, a glimpse of the man behind the formidable facade. Another time, she confessed to the house assistant that she missed a particular type of simple, comforting tea from her old neighborhood bodega. The next morning, a steaming cup of that exact tea, perfectly brewed, was waiting on her bedside table. Roman had orchestrated it. He never mentioned it, never took credit, but Clara knew. These small, unexpected comforts, these quiet demonstrations of his acute awareness of her, slowly chipped away at her resolve to hate him. Confusion warred with a cautious, almost dangerous sense of safety. The friction between them finally flared during one of their daily debriefs, Roman's term for his brief, intense interrogations about her day. "I need to go out," Clara declared, cutting straight to the chase. She was tired of the gilded cage, tired of the endless, silent surveillance. "I need to breathe air that isn't filtered by your security systems." I need to walk outside, Roman. She hadn't used his first name before. It felt like a small act of rebellion, a carving out of her own territory. He leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled, his eyes unreadable. You are safe here, Clara. The city outside is not. Safe? I'm a prisoner. Her voice, usually so controlled, cracked with frustration. You saved me from one man only to imprison me yourself. What kind of freedom is this? His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing beneath his skin. This is necessary protection. Silas Thorne is dealt with, but his associates are not blind. Others will have noticed your proximity to me. You are a potential liability, Clara. A weakness they would exploit. So I'm a target now because of you, she challenged, her voice rising. You became a target the moment you looked at me, he countered, his voice low and dangerous, and I chose to look back. My protection is not a request. It is a condition of your safety and your sister's. He rose, his tall frame suddenly towering over her. The air in the room seemed to thicken, charged with his barely contained power. You wish to be free? Free to be hurt? Free to risk Lily's well-being for a walk around the block? I think not, little bird. His use of the endearment, now laced with an undeniable possessiveness, made her shiver. It was a stark reminder of his control, his absolute dominion. Yet, beneath the anger, a flicker of something else ignited within her, a dangerous, undeniable current of simmering attraction. His intensity, his ruthless devotion to her safety, even if it meant her confinement, was a potent, bewildering force. She hated it. And part of her, the dark, hidden part, found herself undeniably drawn to it. She met his gaze, defiance battling with a dawning, terrifying awareness that this man, with his rules and rare smiles, was slowly, irrevocably, claiming more than just her debt. He was claiming her soul. The routine in Roman's penthouse, for all its opulence, was becoming a strange kind of normal. Clara still woke each morning with a faint dread, the city lights outside her window mocking her confinement, but the dread was now tempered by a fragile, tentative peace. Lily's improving health, a miracle orchestrated by Roman's boundless resources, was a constant balm to her bruised soul. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee, strong and dark, was one of the few sensory comforts she allowed herself to truly savor in this golden cage. Yet, the undercurrent of danger never truly faded. It was in the hushed tones of Roman's security detail, the fleeting glances from his personal assistant, the knowledge that beyond these impenetrable walls, Silas Thorne still seethed. Clara knew Silas wouldn't simply vanish, not after being so spectacularly superseded. The shark would bite back. It was merely a question of when and how viciously. The first sign of trouble came subtly, like a chill wind preceding a storm. A newspaper, usually pristine and delivered directly to Roman's study, was left carelessly open on a side table in the living area. Clara, drawn by a morbid curiosity she couldn't suppress, found herself scanning the local business section. A small article, almost hidden amongst the stock reports, mentioned a series of unforeseen regulatory complications impacting several high-end underground establishments, including prominently the Viper's Denver. It spoke of sudden audits, frozen assets, and a distinct air of impending collapse for Thorne's empire. Clara's blood ran cold. This wasn't a coincidence. This was Roman. Later that evening, the tension in the penthouse was palpable, a low hum that vibrated through the very floorboards. Roman was in his study, the doors closed, his voice a low, guttural murmur of Italian, sharp, concise, undeniable. Clara, sitting in the living room, ostensibly reading, felt every word as if it were a physical blow. She couldn't understand the language, but the inflection was clear: command, anger, ruthless efficiency. The air crackled with his controlled fury. Then came the call that plunged Clara back into absolute terror. Her new phone, usually silent, chimed with an incoming call from Lily's nurse. Clara snatched it up, her fingers trembling. "Hello? Is Lily okay?" The nurse's voice was tight, strained. "Miss Thorne, there was an incident." Two men trying to force their way into Miss Lily's private room. They claimed to be her family, demanding to check on her care. Security intervened. They were quite aggressive. Clara's breath hitched, a strangled cry escaping her lips. Lily, is she hurt? The image of Silas's cold eyes, his veiled threat against Lily, flashed before her. He had done it. He had targeted the one person she couldn't live without. She's fine, Miss Thorne. Security was very quick. The men were apprehended, escorted off the premises. But it was unsettling. We've increased security around her room. Relief, so potent it made her dizzy, flooded Clara. But it was quickly replaced by a white-hot wave of terror. Silas wasn't playing games. He was coming for Lily. And then he would come for her. The golden cage suddenly felt flimsy, exposed. She wasn't safe. Lily wasn't safe. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at her throat. Before she could even process her terror, Roman's study door opened. He stood there, his face a mask of chilling composure, but his emerald eyes, usually so controlled, burned with an inferno of barely contained rage. He had heard. He always heard. They tried to reach her, Clara whispered, her voice raw with fear. Silas, he sent men to the hospital. Roman merely nodded once, a grim, decisive movement. I know. He made a curt gesture to one of his silent security men who instantly disappeared down the hall, presumably to his communication hub. Then Roman picked up his own phone, his fingers flying across the keypad. Ensure the perimeter around the hospital is doubled immediately, he commanded into the phone, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Identify those men, every detail, and send a clear message to Silas Thorne. A message he will feel. His gaze, lethal and unyielding, met Clara's. No, not just feel. A message he will drown in. Clara watched him, mesmerized by the sheer, unbridled power he exuded. His ruthlessness, usually so veiled, was now laid bare. He was a force of nature, a predator unleashed. She saw his darker side, the icy core of a man who ruled through fear and absolute control. It was terrifying. Yet paradoxically, as he spoke, as he issued commands that would undoubtedly dismantle Silas's world, a profound sense of security settled over her. He wasn't just powerful, he was her shield. Reports began to filter back to Roman quickly. Clara, sitting silently across from him in the vast living room, overheard fragments. The men have been dissuaded, sir. They won't be bothering anyone again. The words were chillingly vague, yet Clara understood. They weren't simply escorted off. They were gone, disappeared. Then, a flurry of urgent calls from Roman's financial team. Mr. Volkov, Thorne's main accounts are completely frozen. His shell corporations are collapsing. The Viper's Den is facing unprecedented legal action. He's bleeding dry, sir. Roman listened, his expression impassive, then gave a single chilling order, squeeze harder. Leave him nothing. Not even the air he breathes. Clara stared at him, awe and fear twisting in her gut. He hadn't lifted a hand directly, hadn't uttered a single curse, but his wrath was more devastating than any physical violence. He was systematically annihilating Silas, not just his business, but his very existence within this dark world. He was efficient, terrifyingly so. He ended the call, his green eyes still burning with a cold fire. He looked at Clara, and the intensity in his gaze softened, just a fraction. He will not touch Lily again, he stated, his voice a quiet promise that resonated with absolute finality. Nor will he touch you. Clara swallowed, the lingering terror slowly receding, replaced by a strange, intoxicating cocktail of relief and admiration. He had protected them. He had moved mountains, broken empires, all to ensure their safety. She had witnessed Roman Volkov's darkness, the chilling extent of his power, and instead of fear, what bloomed in her was an undeniable, terrifying sense of absolute security. In his shadow, she was untouchable. In his gilded cage, she was safe. He crossed the room in a few silent strides, stopping directly in front of her. His large hand reached out, not to touch, but to gently cup her chin, tilting her face up to meet his intense gaze. "You are mine, Clara," he murmured, his thumb brushing lightly across her trembling jaw. "And what is mine, no one takes. No one even tries." The possessiveness in his voice was overwhelming, suffocating, yet utterly, undeniably thrilling. It was a promise, a claim. And for the first time, Clara didn't want to fight it. She wanted to lean into it, to let his power consume her. He was dangerous, but he was her danger. And she was finally, terrifyingly, completely safe. A soft knock on the penthouse door broke the charged silence, a jarring intrusion into their intimate, dangerous bubble. Roman's eyes, still locked on hers, hardened slightly, his grip on her chin tightening almost imperceptibly. He knew his men wouldn't interrupt without cause. Something else was happening. Something new. And Clara realized, with a jolt that sent a fresh wave of apprehension through her, that Roman's world was vast, and Silas Thorne was merely one, quickly diminishing shadow within it. The true depth of her new golden cage and the complexities of the man who held the key were only just beginning to unfold. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The aftermath of Silas Thorne's spectacular downfall left an unsettling calm in the penthouse. The air no longer thrummed with the electric tension of impending threat, but rather with the heavy quiet of absolute victory. Silas was gone, his empire a scattered ruin, his very name becoming a whispered warning in the dark corners of the city. Roman Volkov had delivered on his promise with ruthless efficiency, leaving no room for doubt or comeback. Clara, paradoxically, felt both an immense relief and a deepening disquiet. She was safe, yes, Lily was safe, but the cost, the sheer annihilating power Roman wielded, was a chilling reminder of the man she was now bound to. She observed him from the periphery, her senses heightened by her captivity. In the vast, silent expanse of the penthouse, Roman often seemed a solitary figure, moving through the opulent rooms with a quiet gravitas that bespoke immense burden. She'd see him late at night, a solitary silhouette against the glowing cityscape, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his study, a glass of dark liquid in hand, his gaze fixed on something distant and unseen. The sharp scent of his cologne, usually a symbol of his powerful presence, now sometimes carried a subtle undertone of melancholy, of something lost or profoundly lonely. One evening, unable to sleep, Clara wandered into the main living area. The apartment was hushed, save for the distant hum of the city and the gentle whir of the climate control. She found Roman in the library, a room she rarely entered, its walls lined with ancient-looking tomes and modern data screens. He was seated in a worn leather armchair, a thick leather-bound book resting open on his lap, unread. His head was tilted back, eyes closed, a rare moment of unguarded repose. The light from a single lamp cast long shadows across his face, highlighting the subtle lines of fatigue around his eyes, the almost imperceptible tension in his jaw. He looked weary. Not weak, never weak, but profoundly tired. The burden of his power, the constant vigilance, the ruthless decisions required to maintain his empire, etched subtle scars into his formidable facade. She saw a flicker of vulnerability, a fleeting glimpse of the man beneath the impenetrable exterior. He was a king in a golden fortress, but a king often rules alone. He sensed her presence before she made a sound. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert, the emerald green now sharp and assessing. The weary look vanished, replaced by his usual impenetrable mask. "Clara," he acknowledged, his voice a low rumble. "Can't sleep?" "No," she admitted, stepping further into the room, drawn by a sudden, inexplicable urge to understand. "And you?" He merely gestured to the book. "Old habits." He closed it with a soft thud, its aged leather smelling faintly of dust and history. "What troubles you?" She hesitated, then chose honesty. "Silas. The speed of it all. What you did to him. It was terrifying. and effective. But it makes me wonder, what else are you capable of? Roman's gaze held hers, unwavering. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, his posture relaxed yet intensely powerful. I am capable of anything necessary to protect what is mine, Clara. And now you are mine. The possessiveness in his voice was raw, untamed, but was accompanied by a strange, unsettling vulnerability that made her chest ache. Why me? She asked, the question escaping before she could censor it. Why go to such lengths for a casino dealer you barely knew? He looked away then, his gaze drifting to the shadowed shelves, a rare crack in his carefully constructed facade. Family, he said, his voice softer, almost a whisper. I had a sister. Younger. Fragile. She was exploited. By someone like Silas. I failed to protect her. The cost was everything. His jaw tightened, a muscle flexing. I swore then I would never fail again. Never allow another innocent to be used, to be broken. Especially not on my watch. Clara's breath hitched. A past wound, deep and devastating. It explained so much, his ruthlessness, his intense protectiveness, the dark core of his power. It wasn't just about control. It was about atonement, about an unfulfilled vow. Empathy, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her fear. She saw the ghost of a younger, perhaps more vulnerable Roman, etched onto the formidable man before her. I'm so sorry, she whispered genuinely. He turned back to her, his eyes, though still guarded, holding a flicker of something raw. Pity is not required, Clara. Understanding, perhaps. I understand wanting to protect your family, she said, her own voice thick with emotion. Lily is everything to me. Before you, I dreamt of getting her well, then just disappearing. Finding a small life, where no one knew my name, where I could just breathe, be free. She looked down at her hands, twisting them. I missed the light, being a photographer, capturing moments. My life now, it feels like it's just waiting. He listened, his silence a rare form of acceptance. When she finished, he merely nodded. Freedom is a luxury few can afford, little bird. Especially those who live in shadows, or those who are touched by them. He rose from the armchair, moving towards her with that silent, predatory grace. The distance between them, usually so carefully maintained, began to shrink. The air crackled with an unspoken tension, thick with emotional intimacy and a blossoming desire. You speak of shadows, Clara murmured, her gaze locked on his. But you are always in control of them, aren't you? Always, he confirmed, his voice a low thrum that vibrated through her. He stopped inches from her, his sheer physical presence overwhelming. The scent of him, clean, sharp, uniquely Roman, filled her senses. But control comes with a cost. Loneliness. His eyes, normally so unyielding, held a fleeting glimpse of that profound isolation. Until you. His hand came up, slow and deliberate, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. His calloused thumb brushed softly against her jawline, sending a jolt of pure sensation through her. Her breath hitched. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, but beneath it, she felt the undeniable strength of his grip, the possessive claim. Clara, he murmured, his voice ragged around the edges, his gaze dropping to her lips. The sound of her name, spoken with such raw intensity, was a physical caress. This is dangerous. Then don't stop, she whispered, her own voice barely audible, laced with a reckless defiance that thrilled her. Her heart thundered in her ears, a frantic drumbeat of desire. His revelation of his past wound, her sharing of her dreams, had blurred all the lines between protector and captor, fear and fascination. All that remained was an undeniable, burning need. His head lowered, slowly, agonizingly, until his warm breath ghosted across her lips. Her hands, on instinct, came up to rest on his broad chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. Her fingers curled, clutching. She tilted her head back, meeting him halfway. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tender. It was a hungry, demanding invasion, a powerful claiming that stole her breath and shattered her composure. His lips were firm, warm, tasting of whiskey and something uniquely his. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, crushing her against his unyielding body. Her world tilted, spinning into a vortex of sensation, the press of his mouth, the heat of his body, the intoxicating scent of him, the sheer overwhelming force of his desire. It was possessive, almost violent in its intensity, yet woven through it was a raw, desperate yearning that spoke of his loneliness, his need. When he finally broke the kiss, his forehead rested against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps, mirroring her own. His hands still held her captive, his thumbs stroking the sensitive skin of her back. Her lips throbbed, her body hummed, every nerve ending alive. The silence in the library was broken only by their heavy breathing, a testament to the storm that had just erupted between them. He pulled back just enough to look into her dazed eyes, his emerald gaze now dark with a potent mix of triumph and something unreadable. "You are more dangerous than any enemy, little bird," he murmured, his voice rough. "Because you make me forget everything but you." The statement was both a confession and a renewed claim, a thrilling and terrifying declaration. Clara knew, with chilling clarity, that this kiss had irrevocably changed everything. She was no longer just his asset, his protected. She was something more, something deeper, something profoundly, dangerously desired. And the lines between her gilded cage and his possessive heart had just dissolved into one terrifying, intoxicating blur. What would this new connection mean when the real dangers of his world inevitably resurfaced? The thought sent a shiver of delicious dread down her spine. The lingering phantom warmth of Roman's kiss still burned on Clara's lips, a potent, bewildering sensation that both thrilled and terrified her. The shared vulnerability in the library, his quiet confession about his sister, her own desperate dreams laid bare. It had woven a fragile, dangerous intimacy between them. A new kind of hope, hesitant and unbidden, had dared to bloom in her chest. She was no longer just a protected asset. She was desired, understood, perhaps even cherished, by a man of terrifying power. The golden cage now felt less like a prison and more like a sanctuary, albeit one with emerald-eyed guards. The days that followed were a confusing blend of domesticity and simmering tension. Roman's presence was a constant, undeniable force. He would appear at breakfast, his gaze intense, assessing, yet sometimes holding a flicker of the warmth she glimpsed. He would work in his study, the low murmur of his Italian conversations a constant background, a reminder of the intricate, dangerous web he controlled. He ensured Lily's continued recovery, the daily updates from the hospital a steady stream of good news that softened Clara's heart towards him, even as her mind rebelled against her confinement. She found herself seeking out his gaze, reading the subtle shifts in his expression, learning the nuances of his rare, dangerous smiles. The lines between captor and protector, fear and fascination, were blurred beyond recognition. She had almost dangerously begun to trust him. Then came the morning the fragile peace shattered. Roman had left early, a rare, extended absence for an urgent meeting about expanding his European operations. The penthouse felt unnervingly vast and quiet without him, the silence amplifying her internal anxieties. She was in the kitchen, idly stirring her herbal tea, when a notification pinged on the secure tablet Roman had given her. It was an encrypted message, seemingly bypassing his rigorous security protocols, arriving from an unknown source. A chill snaked down her spine. No one was supposed to be able to reach her directly. She opened it, her fingers stiff. The message was concise, chillingly specific. Subject Clara Thorne. Status, negotiable asset. Volkov discussing terms with Moretti Syndicate. Offer full access to Balkan routes for Thorne. Counter Thorne's casino network for Clara's return. Volkov priority, expansion. Attached was a blurred, grainy audio file. She pressed play, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The voices were muffled, distorted, but unmistakably Roman's. And another, gruff, unfamiliar voice. A necessary sacrifice. The Balkan routes are paramount. She understands the risks of being exposed, a small price. Her blood ran cold. The words, fragmented and warped, were a dagger to her nascent hope. Necessary sacrifice. Small price. They echoed in the silence of the luxurious kitchen, twisting her fragile trust into a knot of bitter disillusionment. It couldn't be. Not Roman. Not after the library. Not after he'd shown her his wounds, his protective fire. But the audio, the details, and the message, the sheer impossibility of it being a hack, it felt terrifyingly real. He was a man of ruthless calculation, after all. His confession about his sister? Perhaps a strategic manipulation, a way to gain her trust, to make her compliant. He had said he wouldn't fail again. Perhaps that meant sacrificing a little bird to secure his empire, to avoid his failure. He had seen her as a liability, a weakness, and now he was trading her. A mere commodity in his ruthless game of power. Despair, sharp and cold, pierced through her. The gilded cage was nothing but a gilded trap. He hadn't saved her. He had merely transferred ownership, intending to sell her off to the highest bidder when the opportunity arose. The betrayal was a physical ache in her chest, a burning wound on her soul. Her defiance, long suppressed, roared back to life, fueled by a heartbroken fury. She wouldn't be traded. She wouldn't be a pawn. Her mind, usually so focused on survival, now raced with desperate energy. She had to get out. For Lily. If Roman was truly planning to hand her over, Lily would be unprotected again, vulnerable to Silas's lingering resentment or worse, to the new shadowy syndicate. She couldn't let that happen. The message offered a glimmer of hope, a desperate lifeline. If seeking true freedom, a contact awaits at the old freight yard, Pier 17, at midnight. He offers safe passage and a new identity for you and your sister. Trust no one else. It was risky, insane even. But what choice did she have? The belief that Roman had abandoned her, that he was negotiating her fate behind her back, was a crushing weight. The raw fear for Lily fueled her. She would take any chance. She spent the day meticulously planning. She observed the rotations of the external security teams from her window, memorized the patterns of the internal staff. Roman's surveillance was omnipresent, but there had to be a blind spot, a moment of vulnerability. She recalled a discreet service entrance in the underground parking garage, rarely used, its sensor less sophisticated than the main gates. She'd seen a staff member use it once for a late-night delivery. As darkness fell, her heart pounded a frantic rhythm. She packed a small bag with essentials, her old battered wallet, a few changes of clothes. The fine fabrics of Roman's world felt alien, suffocating. She chose her oldest, most nondescript clothing, dark jeans, a plain hoodie. Anything to blend in, to disappear. At precisely 11:30 p.m., she moved. The penthouse was silent, bathed in the soft glow of automated nightlights. Her footsteps, muffled by the thick carpets, were barely audible. Each breath felt like a desperate gasp. She reached the service elevator, its cold steel doors sliding open with a soft whir. Descending to the parking garage, every click of the machinery, every shadow, felt like a potential trap. The garage was a cavernous expanse of concrete and hushed engine hums. Expensive cars gleamed under the dim lights. She spotted the service door, a dark rectangle against a concrete wall. Her hands trembled as she inserted the override card she'd covertly borrowed from the housekeeper's utility belt earlier. The lock clicked, a loud, triumphant sound in the echoing space. The cool night air hit her face, sharp and biting, as she slipped out. It smelled of exhaust fumes and damp asphalt, a stark contrast to the sterile air of the penthouse. Exhilaration, wild and fleeting, surged through her. She was out, free. A faint, almost desperate hope flared. She hailed a passing taxi, her voice barely a whisper as she gave the address, Pier 17, Old Freight Yard. The taxi ride was a blur of neon lights and unfamiliar streets. Her heart hammered, a mix of fear and desperate hope. Could this truly be her escape? Could she truly build a new life for herself and Lily, away from the clutches of men like Silas and Roman? The thought of Roman's betrayal, his cold calculation, hardened her resolve. She wouldn't look back. The taxi dropped her off at the edge of a desolate industrial area. The air was thick with a metallic tang of salt and rust. Old warehouses, hulking and dark, loomed against the grimy glow of the city's skyline. Pier 17 was a series of skeletal structures, derelict cranes silhouetted against the dark sky. It was utterly deserted, save for the mournful creak of unseen machinery and the distant lapping of water. A shiver, not just from the cold, ran down her spine. "Hello," she called out, her voice small and lost in the vastness. Her breath plumed in the cold air. A shadow detached itself from the deeper darkness between two shipping containers. Two figures, large and menacing, emerged. They weren't the contact she'd imagined, no warm, reassuring presence. These men were cold, brutish. They moved with a predatory efficiency that instantly erased her fragile hope. "Looking for safe passage, little bird?" One of them sneered, his voice guttural, laced with a cruel amusement. "Volkov sends his regards." Clara's blood ran cold. "Volkov send his regards." The phrase was a physical blow, stripping away her last shred of hope. It was a trap. Not a trap set by an unknown enemy, but a trap set by Roman himself. He had led her here, played on her desperate hope for freedom, only to hand her over. The fabricated message, the audio file, it had all been a meticulous, calculated setup to force her into this brutal reality. He hadn't just betrayed her, he had orchestrated her downfall. Before she could scream, before she could even turn to run, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, another brutally yanked her arms behind her back. A coarse cloth was pressed against her nose, its acrid smell burning her nostrils. Her struggles were weak, desperate flails against insurmountable strength. Darkness consumed her, swift and absolute, as the last coherent thought whispered through her mind. He abandoned me. He sold me. She woke to the biting cold and the stench of damp concrete. Her head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache. Her hands were bound roughly behind her back, her ankles tightly secured. A blindfold, rough and scratchy, covered her eyes, plunging her into a suffocating blackness. Her mouth was gagged, the thick cloth suffocating her pleas. The air was heavy, metallic, smelling of decay and despair. She was in a small, windowless room, the floor cold and unforgiving beneath her. Muffled sounds from a distant street, the rumble of traffic, the occasional blare of a horn, reinforced her terrifying isolation. There was no warmth, no comfort, no soft bed. Only the crushing weight of betrayal and the raw, unadulterated terror of being utterly, completely alone and at the mercy of unknown captors. Roman Volkov, her supposed protector, had delivered her into this abyss. And now she truly was just a little bird, caught in a cage, waiting for the hunter to return. She was nothing but a pawn, a sacrifice, and a desperate, heartbroken plea for Lily's safety was the only sound she could make against the gag, unheard and unanswered in the suffocating darkness. The moment Roman Volkov stepped back into his penthouse, the very air seemed to crackle with an unspoken anomaly. The usual hum of efficient silence was replaced by a strange, almost imperceptible void. His senses, honed to an unnerving degree by years of living on the knife edge of power, registered it instantly. Too quiet. Too still. The faint, clean scent of Clara's presence, a subtle blend of chamomile tea, and something uniquely her own was absent. A cold, hard knot formed in his gut. His men met him at the elevator, their faces grim, their usual stoicism replaced by a visible unease. "Sir," his lead enforcer, Kian, began, his voice tight. "Miss Thorne, she's gone. We lost her signal from the internal trackers approximately 3 hours ago. The service exit from the garage was activated. No external breaches, no signs of forced entry. It appears she left willingly." The last words hit Roman like a physical blow. Willingly, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Clara, his little bird, escaping her golden cage. A flash of the raw vulnerability they had shared in the library, the tender, fierce passion of their kiss, exploded in his mind, replaced by a searing, white-hot rage. She left me. But then another thought, colder and more terrifying, sliced through his fury. Clara was smart, but naive to the true dangers outside his protection. Leaving willingly didn't mean safe passage. It meant exposed, vulnerable. And in his world, vulnerability was a death sentence, especially for someone who had just become the central target of his obsession. Roman's composure, usually ironclad, shattered. His emerald eyes, usually calm and calculating, flared with an unadulterated fury that made Kian and his men visibly recoil. Willingly, Roman's voice was a low, guttural growl, barely controlled. She was lured, manipulated. Find her. No. Bring every resource to bear. Every contact. Every camera. Every street informant. I want her back, unharmed. And I want the head of whoever touched her. He stormed into his private command center, a hidden room within his study, where walls of screens displayed live feeds from every corner of the city, global financial markets, and encrypted communication channels. He moved with the focused, lethal precision of a predator zeroing in on its prey. His fingers flew across keyboards, barking orders into multiple phones simultaneously, his voice a dangerous tapestry of English, Italian, and Russian. Activate Project Nightingale, he commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. This was his most extensive covert network, usually reserved for intelligence gathering on rival syndicates. Global satellite imagery, traffic camera overrides, facial recognition. I want eyes on every street, every alley. Prioritize all known associates of Silas Thorne. He is not dead until I confirm it myself. Kian, accustomed to Roman's calculated ruthlessness, had never seen this raw, almost unhinged intensity. Roman wasn't just searching, he was hunting. His primal fear for Clara had stripped away the layers of polished control, revealing the apex predator beneath. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Data streams scrolled across screens. Maps lit up with blinking dots. Faces flashed in rapid succession. Roman's jaw was a granite mask, his eyes burning with an inferno of focus. Then a ping. A grainy image from an old, almost defunct street camera near the docks. Clara, her small, defiant figure, hailing a taxi. Followed by two men. Not his men. Not Kian's men. Men with the unmistakable gait of low-level muscle. Zoom in. Enhance, Roman snarled. The image sharpened. The taxi's license plate. The men's faces, rough and menacing. Run facial recognition. Cross-reference with Thorne's known operatives. Now, the results flashed back. Known associates of Marco Rossi. Sub-lieutenants in Rossi Syndicate. Recent activity. Increased surveillance of Thorne's remaining assets. Rossi. A smaller, opportunistic syndicate that had tried to pick at the bones of Thorne's fallen empire. They must have intercepted her, exploiting her vulnerability. A cold, lethal fury settled over Roman. He hadn't just removed Silas, he had created a vacuum that others were trying to fill. And Clara had walked straight into it. Prepare the retrieval team, Roman commanded Kian, his voice dangerously calm. Arm them with non-lethals, unless absolutely necessary. I want her back, unharmed. He paused, his gaze hardening. And get my car. I'm going myself. Kian looked surprised. Sir, with all due respect, it's too dangerous. Let my men handle it. Roman's eyes, blazing emerald fire, met Kian's. She is mine, Kian, and no one else touches her. The drive was a blur of speed and controlled aggression. Roman, behind the wheel of his customized armor-black sedan, tore through the city streets, his eyes fixed on the GPS tracking a signal from the old freight yard near Pier 17. His men, in 3 other black SUVs, followed like a deadly convoy. The roar of the engine filled the confined space, mirroring the thunder in his chest. He replayed the fragmented audio, the fake message, the calculated lie that had lured her out. A surge of self-recrimination mixed with blinding rage. He had been too confident, too secure in his golden cage. He had underestimated her fear, her desperation, and her fierce loyalty to Lily. And now she was paying the price. The freight yard was a desolate expanse of rusted metal and decaying concrete, shrouded in a thin, cold mist. The air reeked of brine and forgotten dreams. Roman brought his car to a screeching halt, his men fanning out, weapons drawn, their movements precise and silent. He himself moved like a phantom, his heavy boots making barely a sound on the gravel. They found a warehouse, a hulking, derelict structure, its corrugated metal walls scarred with rust. Faint light leaked from cracks in the boarded-up windows. Roman's men took up positions. "Breach," Roman ordered, his voice a low, lethal whisper. The door exploded inward with a hydraulic ram. Roman was the first one in. The scene inside was a tableau of depravity. 3 men, Rossi's thugs, were in a circle around a single, slumped figure tied to a rickety chair. Clara. Her blindfold was askew, revealing the terror in her wide, haunted eyes. Her mouth was still gagged, her hands bound, her small frame trembling violently. One of the thugs was laughing, a cruel, guttural sound, holding a camera phone. Another leaned in too close, his touch repulsive. A primal roar tore from Roman's throat. It was not human. It was the sound of a beast unleashed, a king defending his queen. He moved with a speed and brutality that was shocking, even to his own men. The first thug, the one with the camera, didn't even see him coming. Roman's fist connected with his jaw with a sickening crack, sending him flying across the concrete floor, unconscious before he even landed. The second man, startled, reached for a knife. Roman moved faster. A blur of motion, a guttural grunt, and the thug was slammed against a rusted shipping container, his head hitting the metal with a sickening clang. He slid down, leaving a crimson smear. The third thug, the one who had dared to touch Clara, fumbled for a gun. Roman was on him in an instant. No hesitation. No mercy. His hand locked around a man's wrist, twisting with bone-shattering force. A scream tore from the man's lips as the gun clattered to the floor. Roman then slammed his knee into the man's gut, doubling him over, then drove his fist into the side of his head. The man crumpled, a heap of broken bones and whimpering pain. The entire brutal exchange took less than 30 seconds. Silence fell, broken only by Clara's ragged, terrified gasp and the distant creak of the warehouse. Roman's men stood motionless, weapons still raised, stunned by the sheer, unbridled savagery of their boss. Roman didn't spare a glance at the fallen men. His eyes, still blazing with a cold, lethal fury, were fixed solely on Clara. He knelt before her, his large hands, usually so controlled, trembling slightly as he tore away the gag from her mouth, then the blindfold from her eyes. Clara blinked, her vision blurry, the harsh warehouse light assaulting her senses. Her eyes, wide and filled with raw terror, met his. The last thing she remembered was his betrayal. Now she saw his face smudged with dirt, a trickle of blood from a graze on his temple, his emerald eyes burning with an intensity that was both terrifying and utterly possessive. "Clara," he rasped, his voice raw, laced with a primal relief that shocked her. He reached for her bound wrists, tearing at the ropes with a furious urgency. The ropes, thick and rough, chafed her skin, but his touch, though urgent, was careful, almost tender. He didn't want to hurt her. As the ropes fell away, Clara sagged against him, her body shaking uncontrollably. The terror, the betrayal, the sheer relief of seeing him, the man who had abandoned her but now had saved her, it was an overwhelming flood. She felt the solid warmth of his body against hers, the comforting scent of his expensive cologne, now mixed with the metallic tang of blood and sweat. He was a force of nature, a terrifying, beautiful monster, and he had come for her. He pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest, his head burying itself in her hair. "My little bird," he murmured, his voice thick with a mixture of possessiveness and relief. I thought I had lost you." His embrace was fierce, almost painful, a silent testament to the depth of his fear, his obsession. Clara clung to him, her tears finally falling, soaking into the pristine fabric of his suit. The betrayal, the manipulation, it still stung, but in this moment, held in his powerful, unyielding arms, all that mattered was the overwhelming, absolute safety. He was her golden cage, her formidable protector, her dangerous obsession. And he had come for her. He had come, and the depth of his fury, unleashed to save her, was the most terrifying and beautiful declaration of love she had ever witnessed. The return to Roman's penthouse was a blur of motion, her body still trembling violently in his arms. The icy chill of the warehouse, the metallic tang of fear, the brutal faces of her captors, it all receded, replaced by the encompassing warmth and absolute security of Roman's embrace. He carried her through the vast, gleaming foyer, his steps silent and unwavering, his jaw a granite mask of focused intensity. The lingering scent of blood and grime from the rescue clung to him, a visceral testament to the savage fury he had unleashed. He didn't take her to her opulent bedroom. Instead, he brought her directly to his own, a sanctuary of dark, masculine luxury, where the city lights glittered distantly, muted by heavy, soundproofed glass. He laid her gently on the vast king-size bed, the silk sheets cool and impossibly soft against her scraped skin. Every touch was careful, almost reverent, as he assessed her for injuries. "Are you hurt, little bird?" His voice was a low rumble, rough with residual adrenaline, and a fear she now understood was for her. His large hand, still bearing the faint scent of violence, cradled her cheek, his thumb brushing a tear from beneath her eye. Clara shook her head, a soft sob escaping her lips. "No, just scared." The lie tasted bitter, but the truth was more complex. She was terrified, yes, but also profoundly, irrevocably safe. He didn't push. He simply nodded, his emerald eyes, though still burning with a dangerous fire, now softened with a tenderness that stole her breath. He fetched a first aid kit, his movements precise and efficient, then knelt beside the bed. He cleaned the small scrapes on her wrists, where the rough ropes had chafed, his touch feather-light. The antiseptic stung, but the warmth of his fingers, the quiet intensity of his gaze, was a balm to her shattered nerves. The next few days were a blur of enforced rest and unwavering care. Clara drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, plagued by nightmares of cold concrete and menacing shadows. Each time she would wake with a gasp, her body drenched in a cold sweat, only to find Roman there. He rarely spoke, but his presence was a constant, anchoring force. He would sit on the edge of the bed, his hand gently stroking her hair, or simply watch her with an intensity that promised absolute protection. He ensured she had warm, nourishing food brought to her by his silent staff. He personally saw to it that Lily's hospital updates were delivered directly to her, the news of her sister's continued improvement a lifeline back to reality. Slowly, agonizingly, the terror began to recede, replaced by a profound, almost dizzying sense of security. The penthouse, once a golden cage, now felt like an impregnable fortress. The soft hum of the sophisticated security systems, once a reminder of her captivity, now whispered of her complete safety. The scent of Roman, a mix of expensive cologne, clean linen, and something uniquely masculine and dangerous, became synonymous with peace. One evening, as the city lights twinkled like scattered diamonds below, Clara finally found the courage to speak. The message, the audio file. She began, her voice still a little shaky. It was all a lie, wasn't it? Trap. From Rossi. Roman, seated in an armchair across the room, looked up from the glowing screen of his tablet. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp. Yes, he confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. A calculated ruse, designed to exploit your vulnerability, your distrust of me. Rossi believed you were my weakness. He intended to use you to lure me, or simply to damage my reputation. His jaw clenched, a subtle sign of the enduring rage beneath his controlled exterior. But you came from me, Clara whispered, the wonder in her voice raw. The memory of his unleashed fury in the warehouse, the speed and brutality with which he had dispatched her captors, was still vivid. It had been terrifying, barbaric, and utterly, undeniably magnificent. You are mine, Clara, he stated, his voice a low, possessive rumble. And no one takes what is mine. He rose, crossing the opulent carpet with silent, predatory grace, coming to stand by the bed. His gaze, emerald green and fiercely possessive, held hers. They learned that lesson. Brutally. And they had. While Clara recuperated, Roman's reckoning had been swift, merciless, and absolute. She hadn't seen it directly, but she had pieced it together from the hushed conversations of his men, the occasional news snippets quickly suppressed, of sudden, inexplicable collapses in various criminal enterprises. She overheard calls from Kian, his voice laced with grim satisfaction, reporting on the utter obliteration of Rossi's network, piece by piece. Silas Thorne, she asked one afternoon, her voice still quiet. Roman, who had been observing her from across the breakfast table, merely took a sip of his dark coffee. Silas Thorne is no longer a concern. His options have been permanently limited. The words, delivered with chilling calm, spoke volumes. Clara didn't need details. She understood. Roman didn't just defeat his enemies, he erased them. She watched him the days that followed, seeing the methodical dismantling of his enemies unfold with cold, surgical precision. She saw the true depth of his vengeance, a force as vast and unyielding as his empire. And instead of fear, a strange, dark satisfaction began to bloom within her. They had targeted her. They had hurt her. And Roman was making them pay. Profoundly. Absolutely. She understood with chilling clarity that this vengeance, this ruthless assertion of power, was all for her. It was a terrifying, beautiful testament to his unwavering, possessive devotion. Her trust, once shattered by the illusion of betrayal, now cemented into something unbreakable. She had seen his darkness, witnessed his capacity for unimaginable violence, and realized that this was simply his world. And in this world, his darkness was her ultimate protection. One night, as he sat beside her on the bed, his presence a comforting weight, Clara reached out, her fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched the faint graze on his temple, where she knew he had been injured during the rescue. His skin was warm beneath her touch, his muscles hard. He looked at her, his emerald eyes softening, the boss fading, the man emerging. You truly understand, little bird? He asked, his voice low, almost a plea. Yes, she whispered, her gaze unwavering. I understand. This is your world, Roman. And in it, you protect what's yours. With everything you have. And I am yours. The words, a complete surrender, felt right. They were not born of fear, but of a profound, unwavering devotion, acceptance of her place in his dangerous, powerful world. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. Then you know what happens next, he murmured, his voice a promise and a threat, laced with raw, untamed desire. What happens when you truly accept me? Truly give yourself? Clara swallowed, her heart pounding a heavy rhythm. She didn't know the specifics, but she knew the feeling. It was the undeniable pull, the dangerous, intoxicating chemistry that had simmered between them since that first fateful glance across the poker table. It was the complete, utter claiming. Tell me, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes locked on his, ready to step fully into his embrace, into his world, into his love. The shadows of the past were fading, replaced by the terrifying, exhilarating dawn of a new, dangerous future. His and hers. And it would be forever. A year? A year had passed since Clara Thorne had traded her suffocating cage for a golden one. A year since Roman Volkov had unleashed his fury to reclaim her. A year since she had, willingly and irrevocably, given herself to the man who commanded shadows and empires. The transformation was profound, not just in her circumstances, but within her very soul. The penthouse, once a symbol of her confinement, now felt undeniably like home. Its sleek, minimalist beauty was no longer intimidating. Instead, it reflected the quiet strength and unwavering control that defined Roman's world, and by extension hers. The constant hum of the security systems, the omnipresent cameras, they were no longer oppressive but comforting, a silent testament to the impenetrable bubble of safety Roman had built around them. And Lily, oh Lily, her sister was thriving. The best medical care, unburdened by debt, had brought her back to vibrant health. She had started a specialized art program, her delicate fingers now sketching with joyous abandon. She visited the penthouse frequently, her laughter a bright, melodic counterpoint to the quiet elegance of the Volkov residence. Roman treated her with a quiet, almost paternal affection, a silent promise of protection extending to every facet of Clara's life. Lily, innocent to the darker currents that had woven her sister into Roman's world, saw him as a benefactor, a silent, powerful guardian angel. Clara herself had found a new equilibrium. She no longer dealt cards in smoky dance. Instead, Roman had discreetly funded a small, exclusive photography studio for her, a bright, sun-drenched space where she could once again pursue her passion. Her art now captured the raw beauty of the city, the hidden corners, the fleeting moments of light and shadow, a reflection of her own journey. But her true masterpiece, her most cherished work, was the life she built with Roman. Their bond was a tapestry woven with threads of raw passion, fierce possessiveness, and an unbreakable, almost primal devotion. Roman's gaze, once a tool of dissection, now held a warmth reserved solely for her. His touches, once a veiled threat, were now a constant reassurance, acclaiming. He still had his rules, his demands, his absolute control, but Clara understood them now. They were not chains. They were the meticulous framework of his protection, the expression of his profound, unwavering love. She was his undeniably, absolutely, and she wouldn't have it any other way. One crisp autumn evening, under the glittering canopy of a charity gala for Lily's Art Foundation, an event discreetly funded and organized by Roman, Clara stood beside him, a vision in a sleek emerald green gown that shimmered like his eyes. The room was abuzz with the city's elite, powerful figures from finance, politics, and the shadowed corners of Roman's empire. His hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a silent, possessive anchor. The faint scent of his cologne, rich and masculine, enveloped her. Suddenly, Roman moved, drawing her closer, his hand subtly tightening on her waist. The murmur of conversation around them seemed to dim as his eyes, blazing with that familiar, potent intensity, swept over the room. He wasn't merely observing, he was claiming. He raised a crystal glass, the clinking sound drawing every eye. A hush fell over the assembled guests. Ladies and gentlemen, Roman's voice, deep and resonant, filled the vast ballroom, carrying a command that silenced even the most powerful. I wish to make a simple, yet profoundly important, declaration. His gaze, unwavering and absolute, locked onto Clara's. Her heart thundered in her chest, a drumbeat of anticipation. She knew this was it. His final, public declaration. Many of you know me for my ventures, he continued, the ghost of a dangerous smile playing on his lips. For my acquisitions, my protection of certain interests. Tonight, I present to you my most prized acquisition. My most guarded interest. He turned slightly, pulling Clara even closer, her side pressed against his hard, muscled frame. His other hand lifted, gently cupping her chin, tilting her face up. His thumb brushed softly across her bottom lip, a slow, possessive caress that sent shivers down her spine. This woman, he declared, his voice resonating with an undeniable, absolute authority that left no room for doubt or challenge. Clara Thorne is mine. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. The silence was deafening, charged with shock and immediate understanding. He wasn't just introducing her, he was branding her, marking her as untouchable. She is under my protection, Roman continued, his eyes sweeping over the hushed crowd, under my name and under my absolute devotion. Any attempt to harm her, to disrespect her, or even to cast an unkind glance in her direction will be met with the full and unequivocal force of my resources. Consider this a final public warning. She is off limits. Permanently. His emerald eyes hardened, a silent, lethal threat that promised unimaginable consequences for anyone who dared to challenge his claim. Clara looked into his eyes, seeing the depths of his possessiveness, the unwavering power, the absolute love that fueled his every word. It was a terrifying, breathtaking declaration. It was their happily ever after, Roman style. Not a fairy tale, but a fierce, dark, unbreakable bond forged in danger and sealed with absolute ownership. He lowered his head, his lips brushing hers in a public display of affection that was both tender and utterly possessive. Forever, little bird, he murmured against her mouth, his breath warm and intoxicating. You are truly claimed. Clara smiled, a genuine radiant smile that reached her eyes. She leaned into his touch, into his power, into his world. She was no longer just the casino girl trapped by debt. She was the woman claimed by Roman Volkov, the fiercely protected heart of his dark empire. And as the applause finally broke out, polite yet laced with palpable respect and awe, Clara knew that her journey had led her not to freedom in the conventional sense, but to a different, more profound kind of belonging. One where she was cherished, protected, and loved by the most dangerous man in the city. Her very own Mafia boss. Her very own Mafia boss. Forever. Isn't it true that sometimes our greatest fears hide the path to our fiercest love? Clara's journey reminds us that being trapped by circumstance, feeling like a commodity, doesn't diminish your inherent worth. No matter the shadows you carry or the debts you owe, there's a love that sees beyond your past, ready to claim and protect you with an unwavering strength. A love that doesn't just heal your wounds, but transforms your entire world. If Clara's story resonated with the strength and longing in your heart, join our community. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us below, I am worthy, because you absolutely are.